Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. A strange music show where each and every week we just take a dive into a random album, right? Generate discussions on albums that people probably won't talk about in video essays. Maybe anyway. So in today's episode we're going to be taking a dive into Intrasitive Recordings, a strange label created by Howard Stelzer that offers some very wonderful early instances of lowercase and experimental music that dates all the way back to the 90s. Including actually what was the debut album from the one and only Richard Chartier. Anyway, in today's episode we'll be looking at a much noisier record. This album is in many ways a drone album, but is without a doubt one of the most loudest and overwhelming experiences I think I've ever come across. And yet, I adore it for that. The unrelenting experience that bombards you with pure noise. Challenging, yet very fascinating, and I'm very excited to discuss it today. So today I present Wonders Never Cease by Brendan Murray. So of course, who is Brendan Murray? Well, Brendan Murray is an American composer from Massachusetts whose work often falls into the electronic category, utilising elements of noise, durational sound and sampling in his music with an emphasis on repetition and drone. And across his career, Murray has created a rather extensive discography of experimental releases, including a couple of collaborations here and there that I think I've got one or two of them actually as well. Anyway, today we are diving into Wonders Never Cease, though, an album from Murray released in 2006 on Howard Seltzer's Intransitive Recordings as its 27th official release. And this album sees Murray utilising some live recordings created during 2003-2004, heavily editing them into the creation of this very album alongside some new ideas here and there, of course. A quick point I should actually make as well, some of the original live recordings were actually later released by Murray on his own Bandcamp page in 2020 as part of the album What Became Wonders, which includes even longer versions of some of the album's tracks here. But coming back to this though, what we have is essentially an incredibly intense electronic drone album. Very noisy one that very much overloads you with these heavy, immersive layers of pure sound. Incredible and overwhelming, and yet one of the coolest things I think I've come across, so let's dive in, shall we? So opening up with Hymn 1, we're immediately introduced with no warning whatsoever to this intense metallic electronic drone. Something almost harsh about it to begin with, and it has this amazingly heavy, stunning quality to it like a deadly laser beam of sound. But it's also accompanied by a slight low end here and there, slightly further down the scale that creates a sort of gentle drone ambient bed for this intense drone to just drift atop of. From there you've got the classic drone experience of just being bombarded with a signal of tone that never seems to let go, just always occupying the scene, pushing further and further down on your very being as it attempts to just pull you under the very waves themselves. I find that my mind does the classic thing it always does whenever I hear music like this though, of drifting in and out throughout the experience. My attention just seems to get pulled away by the intense repetitiveness of the drone that's constantly occurring, mid-frequency that's digging into my mind of course, before being pulled back by a sudden awareness of new sounds occupying the mix. I find as this one all progresses, there's suddenly instances of very peculiar lowercase tones coming through here and there, reminiscent kind of like the unusual distorted frequencies that we experience on Doron Sadja's A Piece of String, A Sunset. Almost like field recordings, or maybe even vocals that are attempting to crawl through the dense heavy layers of drones, make themselves heard even though they're affected by so much distortion themselves. But maybe it's almost perhaps my own mind is desperately trying to find context to what I think it is I am hearing. maybe if it's interpreting these as field recording sounds where they may not be at all. But I do find that very effect though to be something very fascinating to experience. How my own interpretation and understanding is just so disrupted by the very experience of listening to music like this. So many particulars feel so strangely hidden and embedded in amongst the distortion and drone, and thus comprehension borders on impossibility the more it all occurs. Just overloading your very senses as the distortion just pulls it through these weirder and stranger directions. I find it fascinating, of course, don't I? Especially 2/3 of the way through this one, when you get a very unusual distorted layer, coming through on the left channel before ending up in the right, just going vroom across this length of time. Its frequency overloading the very circuits themselves before turning into pure discordant noise. The intense, heavy atmosphere just feels so spectacular and amazing, I have to say. And although the slow descent into more and more noise is oddly terrifying to an extent, there is something truly amazing about it when it is experienced. And this track does actually fade away all of its elements towards the end, and you're given somewhat of a lengthy outro where you've got those unusual lowercase drones and high-pitched frequencies on loop, just spinning around in a just spinning around in a stunned daze is what I'm trying to say. It's so baffling, I have to admit. But yes, just spinning around and round, dazed by the entire experience, essentially. It's odd, but it gives us a brief moment of respite, it feels, after the absolutely crushing experience that was the opening of this track. Truly amazing, and something that just feels very exciting to me, like I'm both scared, but very intrigued to find out what will happen next on this album. So moving along, we get the next track of Seas. So kind of coming in from the lo-fi murmuring of field recordings, the unusual tapestry of sounds of someone getting themselves ready perhaps, against a deluge of static filling up the air with this hazy noise. We wonder what will come from all this noise, and the more it all occurs, the more confusing it all seems, The recording just seems to opt for some of this, something that sounds like thumping perhaps, something just there, pounding away, whilst a faint frequency rises in the background, of course. And it all occurs for such a weirdly long time, just droning away and away with a kind of lowercase fuzz like we heard on the likes of actually Self-Heimlich, for example. I have anxiety, but it's okay, I think I deal with it pretty well most of the time. And it, like the noise of the everyday world around us, essentially. That is until we get the occurrence of some synthesized tones coming in out of that mirage, descending heavily as it twists and contorts itself, all the while the same sound of something being hit, almost like a slow percussive element, still present within that mix. And it occurs with that noisy hiss as the frequencies and drones become more intense, until that is all you're left with though. And you find yourselves just suddenly falling headfirst into the dense tapestry of drones. I feel like with all the approach to it all, there's actually a kind of randomness to it all, Note and tones just coming in from nowhere, it seems, adding the textures in very unusual ways. But there's something oddly intimidating about this one though, especially with the lowercase frequencies drifting in and out of that mix, falling away to reveal more terrifying tones from time to time, overloading your senses as it builds up and becomes louder and louder. It becomes once again that incomprehensible thing, where such a medley of tones occur all at once to create this thick slab of pure noise. But the density, I think, is something truly delightful, something amazing about it. With the drones themselves just being so resonating, it's actually odd as we, because it feels almost minimalist to an extent, with the actual particulars of what's going on, there's very little occurring. But even with that, it's still hard to make out the particulars of it all, as it all just drones away and has that that hypnotizing quality that often comes up with music like this. And you end up, having to try force your awareness upon it, even though it just drifts in and out like the very drones themselves. I find myself just unable to comprehend everything occurring here, even though I know for sure that I'm truly fascinated by it all. Weirdly enough, hearing this one kind of calls back so many different things I enjoy from so many different musicians, The persistent frequency of drones reminds me of the like of Greg Davis, albums like Midpoint, where you just got this deluge of consistent low-end drones occurring over and over, pouring like syrup. But with Brendan Murray offsetting it with so much other things, like the lowercase elements kind of remind me a bit more of Doron Sadja, as I previously mentioned. Like, you got a lot of that kind of metallic granular distortion. But then the weird sort of clambering assortment of low-end droning synthesized notes then kind of reminds me of Exit and the album Set, which we also looked at in a previous episode, didn't we? I think this is perhaps my brain trying desperately to find context here, and it just seems to be wandering to any faint reminiscence of anything that I've previously heard, just trying to piece together something to form a context for what I'm listening to here. It's very bizarre though, and it's like just being constantly smothered by these constantly occurring sounds, from drones to field recordings, just all capturing the weird stasis of that similar point in time, suspended forever it feels. The exact effect that you get in drone music that makes it so strange and wonderful to explore, I have to say. Like, half the time, I just feel stunned, in that moment of stasis that's just impossible to capture any sense of cohesion at times. Like a terrifying fairground ride, being pulled along, disassociating as the lights just turn into small circular colours. Like, although it's incomprehensible, it's what I adore in drone music, because it's just so cool when it happens. Moving along, we get to the next track of Hymn 2. Back to the first track then, a sequel to the first track, so back to its aesthetics, right? No. This one just starts with an overwhelming deluge of horrible noise. Super intense and overwhelming, just a distortion of oddly recorded sounds. Now, with the way this one starts, it's almost like a Merzbow level of jump scare, before devolving into such a noisy descent of electronics, just blasting away, destroying everything in its path. Magnetized digitalization of unusual sound sources resulting in pure noise, it feels. Like, it's completely overwhelming. And I find it so oddly stunning, so harsh and overbearing, and yet this odd, fascinating spectacle of noise just bombarding you right over your head as it blasts those laser beams of sound into your brain, before slowly fading out across the length of the entire track's runtime. Like, it's really cool how it does that, because it starts off so harshly and loudly, and yet it just ebbs away at such an incredibly slow pace. Like, it's cool because it does get quieter in some respects. Certain layers fading away whilst others just continue to occupy the scene, highlighting such odd sound instances that feel so threatening in amongst the mix. And yet the sudden bombardment of sounds just forces you to keep going, just push past the growing storm of noise and go further and further into that miasma when it does build up again at times. Like, weirdly enough, this kind of feels like excavating through sound itself, like as though it was all a storm, faulty electronics rattling around as the dust is kicked everywhere. You wonder, how the hell are we going to get through all this, only for it to suddenly morph into this lowercase tunnel of wind. Maybe some kind of field recording of the outdoors of nature, which would actually kind of make sense when you travel right into the next track of Seas. So here we have the longest track, and it feels like after everything we have experienced, we have now found ourselves standing before the open sea, upon the sand as the water washes around us. The wind just gently blowing across your very being, before it then all fades away to let this rather charming assortment of drones just occupy the scene. And there's a very gentle quality, which kind of feels like some kind of accordion perhaps, just gently droning away, which feels like, this feels very pleasant after everything we've experienced, offering very large swells of sound that seem to just fill up the headphones in this wonderful deluge of tones once more, reminiscent of the kind of things you'd get from Pauline the Deliverers, of course. And I think after everything we've had, this feels so charming and delightful to experience. Something rather gentle, as you've got a slow meandering around the instrument, before it then too fades away to let the lowercase hum suddenly occupy the scene. And with how the drones suddenly start to descend, surrounded by that lowercase hum of tape loops circling around and around, accompanied by a further set of drones, like, it's very fascinating as it all occurs, because it's kind of just playing a lot of tricks on you. Like, the frequencies start to become a bit more peculiar, resulting in a composition that seems to start this slow spin right down the drain pipe, essentially. A slowly developing drone that seems to traverse so many different scenes as it all occurs, as though, It's almost like, no, we've gone beyond the sea and now we're aboard a boat, just slowly floating away, letting the current take us down whatever route it sees fit. An odd thing, but this is something I adore in experimental music and drone music, you know. And I will try to do my best to explain, because it seems like a good opportunity to try, so bear with me. So, I like drone music for a lot of different reasons. Something we explored in the video on Set by Exit was that the resonating frequency just being, just being something you respond to in drone music, you know, something we tried to explain a bit there. Bit of an abstract concept, don't know if I explained it all well. But I think it's worth at least trying to discuss when these things do come up from time to time. Because I do find in some drone compositions that seem to just slowly morph into many different scenes over the course of its runtime to be very fascinating, especially when it has that kind of drifting quality, you know, where you imagine the music to be just like water itself, you know, moving along its logical flow, or at times an illogical flow. Like, the music here just seems to navigate with the loose flowing quality that water has of itself, which is perhaps why this particular composition has maybe been named Seas. What I find amazing about these kind of songs is just how completely untethered it feels, like you're just floating and drifting along, you know, occasionally glancing at the ripples just continually pushing outwards. And it feels like the flow does end up pushing through these changing landscapes all linked together by this singular body of water, or sound, however you want to look at it. But to traverse it is to drift along. And I just adore it when music achieves that unusual effect. Like, I think its effect is more often relevant when I'm not trying to articulate it. But I still think it's worth trying to discuss it nonetheless. Like, it's an effect that happens a lot in drone albums that I've experienced. You know, some where, you know, you have that sort of vibrational quality that music experience, but more often in sort of experimental ones where it's just a constantly changing landscape. An example would probably be The Skies Run Into the Sea by Growing. An album I really want to have a look at. I need to try to source a copy from somewhere. This effect, though, I think it's really neat, and I think this track has certainly achieved the unusual effect, you know, in no time, hence why I want to discuss it when I experienced it while listening to the album, of course. Don't know if it makes any sense, but often drone music often doesn't, right? But to get back to the track, this is without a doubt an incredibly cool composition. Like, I find often, it often has the effect other dream music has of your awareness just filtering in and out at various moments, resulting in these passages where sound completely occupy your whole entire being. And with so much of this being slow, sustained, and achieving this sense of pure randomness between the constantly changing times and stuff, the occurrence of this, you know, droning layer pushing further and further down the more it all occurs, like, there's something oddly fascinating about that. And I just adore that kind of ebb and pull effect of being, you know, just dragged into worlds and marveling in the wonderful images, that the music conjures up. This kaleidoscope of colours just morphing before us, essentially. It's another weird thing to try explain, you know, in the enjoyment of drone music, you know, something that maybe has come up before, maybe not, I don't know. All I know is that I actually just really like reviewing these kinds of albums, because it's just so much fun experiencing them when I write about them for the show. It's probably why the drone playlist for weird music suddenly is getting bigger and bigger, as sometimes I just enjoy immersing myself in singular sustained tones. But what's actually kind of interesting about this one is I actually didn't know what this kind of album was going to sound like until I purchased it. This was just something going along on the vibes, essentially. I was interested in reviewing something for Intrasitive Records, as I saw the label cropping up a lot when checking out a lot of artists, the likes of Richard Chartier and Nimperigan and a few others. This label keeps cropping up when researching for various videos, so I thought it'd actually be fun to look at something specifically from the label itself. I found this one was selling in the UK, thought it'd be fun to review it whilst hearing it for the very first time, and so it was a delight to me to find an album of resonating drone music, essentially, because I love drone music, and I certainly like this, so I'm really glad to have a copy and have heard it. But it's kind of cool about music like this, though, like I have no idea what to expect, but then it just ticks the boxes in all the right ways when I first listened to it, so yeah, a very cool album. Before we get ahead of ourselves, though, we actually do have one more final track. Hymn 1 Reprise. So just another instant zap of granular electronic tones again, just ascending with this constant interference, overloading with just unusual effect until a singular held tone plays once more. And this one does feel like a faint remnant of what occurred during the album's first track, except this time it's all the more distorted and equalized to unusual levels that sound so different as well. Almost like a disintegration of the very opening tones, all now playing with this disorganized chaos, the persistent drones against a flickering of harsh disturbances before it all just lets this very thick fog of drone occupy the scene, forcing the whole thing to become overloaded in this amazing wall of sound that fills up the headphones with thick drones and electronic interference. It all just gets louder and louder and louder, more distorted in the left channel until it just feels so suddenly like it's going to fall apart completely in this spectacular deluge of fuzz and noise. It's actually a bit of a harsh reminder of the album's more challenging notions, especially after how beautiful the last track was. This feels like a return to the uncomfortable, overwhelming world that much of this album has occupied from time to time. Like seeing a vision of those worlds that we could not comprehend. Wonders that will never cease. My goodness though, I am so glad I came across this album. This is the exact kind of thing that's just right up my alley. No denying it. I can't resist drone music, it seems. But I think what else though is just how much this album surprised me though, from my rather blind discovery of wanting to check out the label, resulting in an album that I responded very well to, I have to say. It's like a perfect smorgasbord of all the things I love in experimental drone music. Heavy thick drones, instances of lowercase, field recordings, electronics that become wildly distorted, all combined together to make experimental music. It's one of the noisiest and loudest drone albums I think I've ever come across. One that is very harsh at times, and yet its constant unnerving intense atmosphere is just so fascinating to inhabit. Amazing to just experience the vast expanses that the drones offer, and often find the destructive chaos of electronics within it. I'll be honest, I actually have no idea what's going on in this album. What is this? What is that? What is making all of this? A lot of it's sourced from these live shows by Brendan Murray, but still, what was he doing on these shows? Just playing around, it seems? Maybe. Who knows? But, whatever it is, just knowing that I'm experiencing it all at once, it feels like being just completely overwhelmed, and yet I'm just find myself enthralled by the entire experience. A perfect balance between sustained tones and delusions of distortion and noise. I feel like, as a result, it traverses so many different spaces that's impossible to really view the entire scope of it all when I'm trying to think about it. And it's likely the kind of thing that will feel so different in a lot of respects each and every time I hear it. My awareness just drifting with the ebb and pull of so many different elements, each taking centre stage at their own time. This is actually something that makes drone music so fun to listen to. Because you can listen to something over and over and over again, and especially with stuff like this, you find new things that you didn't notice with each and every new listen. Even stuff that you've heard a million times perhaps. It's what I adore about experimental music, essentially. And like I said, I had no idea what I was getting myself in for. But to find this noisy drone album has been a true delight. A little bit like when I first heard Coral City Cameras by Carnivorous Plants, perhaps. Just marvelling in the wonderful spectacle of drone and noise. A truly phenomenal album. Very glad to have come across this one. And so I think with that we will be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. Glad to have discussed Wonders Never Cease by Brendan Murray, of course. Another one for the drone playlist though. And as mentioned, so glad to have come across it. I think it's this has ended up being one of those very rewarding album experiences for me when I first heard it. I don't know how everyone is watching is going to react to it. Probably might not feel anything from it, but I really liked hearing this one. I feel like if I do return to this at some point, my experience is going to be very different though, which, as mentioned, is just very cool about music like this. With this album occupying so many different scenes born from the occurrence of drones, electronics, field recordings, and whatever else Brendan Murray has been using, it just results in a fascinating album experience that contains a multitude of details across its runtime, and so many of which just blur past in an instant. Perfectly hypnotising music that I'm very grateful I come across. So yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music then. If you watching now are at all familiar with Intransitive Recordings, then let us know in the comments below more that we should be checking out maybe. If not, I'll try find some myself. I guess we'll find out in a future video, if there ever is one. For now though, I wish you all the best. Hope you take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.